o'clock and I want to get started. This is the Saugus Board of Appeals on June 11th. A continuance of the meeting. The Zoning Board of Appeals will hold a public hearing Wednesday, June 11th at Saugus Town Hall Annex, 25 Main Street. Continued from May 29th, 2025. An application by 961 Broadway Development LLC for a comprehensive permit pursuant to MGLC 40B 20-23 and 760 CMR 56 to authorize the construction of 189 rental unit apartments, 48 perpetually restricted as affordable units at 80% AMI in two structures on approximately 6.77 acre parcel of land located at 961 Broadway. Lot number 1, plan number 1029, and 999 Broadway. Lot number 2, plan number 1029, and 39 R Forest Street. Lot number 64, plan number 1029, with 315 parking spaces. Waivers by local bylaws are requested per Chapter 40B from Sections 2.4, 5.6, 5.7, 6.2, 6.8A, 6.8B, 6.8J, 6.9, 7.4L, 8, 10.2, Article 12, Article 15, Sections 21.1, 21.3, 21.4, 21.5, 21.6, 21.7, 21.8, 21.9, 21.10, 21.11, 21.12, and 21.13 of the Saugus zoning bylaws, and sections 500, 702, and 703 of the general bylaws of the town of Saugus, to authorize the Saugus Board of Appeals to issue all local approvals under these sections. Okay, hope I don't have to say that too many more times.
That on Wayne.
All right. We've been joined just now by Special Town Council for the town of Saugus, Jesse Shoma. I want to introduce the board. We have Robert Northrop, Frank Federico, Chris Riley, Peter Rossetti, and myself, Tom Travis. And I'm thinking I'm going to let the petitioner lead us in the discussion.
I do Pledge of Allegiance first.
Yeah, that'd be good. I'm out of breath. That's it. All right, Chris, can you lead us?
Yes, sir. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Also, if you're going to speak tonight, I'd like you all to be sworn in right now. I promise to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God.
I do.
And Lynn, I'm going to let you lead a little bit into us tonight. And hopefully we get
What is
things
that?
accomplished. I see you have.
Nothing.
You said you were going to have your whole team here.
For the record, Lynn Sweet, LDS Consulting Group out of Wellesley, Massachusetts. We're really happy to be here again. We've come in force, hoping that we can answer all your questions. We have Sean Reardon here from Tetra Tech, our attorney Chris Alphin from Hafferty, Browski, Silverstein. I forgot one.
You got most of them.
Most of them. Dan Tumas from Vanessa and Associates, and Jay Szymanski from the architectural team. So since the last meeting, we were made aware of a document that an email that came in from a staff employee with regard to civil engineering matters, as well as reminded of a letter that was written during the project eligibility process in July of 2024. And they didn't come in quite the proper door, so we asked Stephanie to put them into the record with Tom's permission. And we had Sean's office, Tetra Tech, respond to that, the DPW letter and the email that came in from another staff employee, just to be 100%, sure that Chairman Travers has mentioned a few times that he wants to make sure that he gets input from department heads. So we're happy to discuss any of those issues. Also, since the last hearing, we had a working session with MDM, the traffic peer reviewer. We spoke with them last Friday at length for the 2 or 3 issues that were open for them. Following that meeting, I believe that they also submitted another letter to you that addressed the last couple of issues that were open with them. At the last hearing, Board Member Riley asked whether or not the owner of the property would be willing to work on, basically the marketing corridor at the front of the building, as it faces Route 1. And so kind of, 2 updates on that front. One, nothing had been done with regard to any kind of landscaping because the owner had been replacing pumps in Route 1 and rushed to get those done before they were no longer allowed to actually get a street opening permit in Route 1. And those pumps have since recently been installed. And so he will be working on freshening the landscaping in front of the building over the next couple of weeks. He also is 100% committed when this project takes place. There's going to be some rearranging of those driveways and the curb cuts and whatnot. He will do an overhaul if and when this building goes forward. So we heard your concerns, understand them. We've got an interim plan and kind of a long-term plan, so thank you for those comments.
Thank you.
Did we submit anything else that I forgot about? I think that's it. I think we're civil traffic architecture. I think we did submit one more document from Jay to Cliff answering the last handful of questions as well. So we've done the best we can to submit and be responsive. We appreciate all of the peer reviewers, their time and your time, and it's your agenda. We're here to answer questions.
Well, I just want to make sure the members understand that on the town website, all reports, the peer reviews, all the documentation, it's all now been uploaded to the corporate website, okay? Stephanie's been working hard on that this week.
She has. We're appreciative.
On Monday, I came in here, and we made Stephanie made some phone calls around, and we were a little bit informal on this, and I apologize for that. But the first person I met with Monday morning was the building inspector, Michael Vecchi, who is also an architect. And his one concern, he said, was parking, and I know there's a letter out there now that addresses that. And I just try, and hopefully Mike will see that, and we'll discuss that further. Then after meeting with him, I came down, and Stephanie, I called different department heads. We put a call into the fire chief. I have not heard anything back from him at this point. I don't know if Stephanie has. But I think he's been in communication, as far as I know, right along. Yes, Mr. Ed.
Yeah, so we've been coordinating with the deputy fire chief
Okay.
to talk about access and
Who's the deputy chief? Scott Phelan?
Phelan, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and so it's part of a relationship that we've had for a long time.
Okay.
We've looked at this
Sure.
parcel because it's got a really unique sort of fire access scenario.
Okay.
He did mention that he hadn't seen the most recent plans, so we have to send them those, but the circulation's pretty similar to everything that he's seen in the past.
Okay, so I'm leaving you to be on top of that with them.
Yeah, and you know the fire department.
I know Scott
gets what the
very
fire
well.
department needs, yeah.
I'll touch base with them too. We also had a talk with the town engineer Todd, and Todd's last name is
Baldwin?
Baldwin. And Todd was getting in touch with people and looking for some answers too.
That's the letter that I was referring to. He
Okay.
sent an email directly to Sean
Okay,
with 6 or 7 bullet points. So the
Yeah.
letter that we submitted on Monday or Tuesday of this week addressed both the DPW director's comments from last summer as well as those bullet points.
okay.
Yeah.
I did reach out to the police department again, because several months ago, the police chief was right on that, and his concerns were right up front, and I felt they were dealt with now, but we'll finalize those. I don't know if there's any other department heads that we need to reach out to? Are you thinking there is, maybe, Lynn, or?
No, I'm just thinking that I know, an issue that came up at the last hearing that we discussed with MDM was with regard to the counting on Forest Street and the cut-through traffic there. I know that was a really big concern for everybody. And we were able to speak with a select board member who spoke with the police department, and that there had been counting for 2 weeks in February of '24, and the result of that was that the average speed on the road was 9 miles per hour, and the police and the select board didn't feel that there was any action that they needed to take. But the bottom line is they actually have the counting data from the counters that were out there, so if there ever needs to be additional research, they've kind of got a baseline down the road.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm
Did
just
you
trying to
say
think of things that
9?
were-
9 miles?
29 miles an hour.
29, okay.
Yeah, so, I think, it was addressed between the police and the select board.
Okay.
Yeah,
Mr. Allen?
I don't think that's true. Yeah, this hasn't come before the Board of Selectmen.
They're the ones who would order the counters to be there.
Right, but
And
am I missing something? Or has this not been on any Selectmen agenda?
This was a
in recent history?
year ago. Not our project. No, it wasn't.
This was a
There
different
was,
project.
they did counting on their own on Forest Street for 2
Oh,
weeks.
okay,
February
okay, a year ago,
24.
okay.
Right.
All right, thank
Yeah.
you.
And so we just wanted to know, again, we heard the concern, we followed up on it, we got the information.
Okay.
And that's where, some of the discussion with MDM was around on Friday.
Do you happen to know what 2 weeks in February?
I'm sure I can find out.
Okay.
I
I'm
don't
sure they
know.
see it off in school vacation week.
Well,
That's what you
that
were
was my
thinking.
concern, yeah.
I would hope they would.
Huh? It was 2 weeks, so at least one of the weeks there
Yeah.
would have been, school in session, one would think. But we weren't in charge of that, but
No,
I think that, the takeaway from that is that there is data. There's like a baseline already.
Mhm.
So I think that's always really helpful. So,
Well, and I'm not sure that Forest Street is really that bad a situation anyway. As Peter can attest to, ever since Brake Cart got closed to through traffic, the traffic on Forest Street, the speeding down the road really subsided.
Slowed down a lot.
When you were unable to drive to the
I
beach.
don't know where y'all living.
Well, I don't think it's as bad as it, we weren't there when the beach was open though either. All right, you weren't. Then it was wild. At the end of the day, it would be wild.
Didn't a boy get killed on that street?
I can remember there being a death at the Milano, between Milano, the famous turn, the infamous turn, I should say.
Yeah.
I remember somebody got killed back there, but that would have been around in the early 70s.
But people do go fast.
I don't know if there was another fatality there. I know they do.
Yeah.
I know they do, but it's not as bad as it once was, believe it or not. When the beach was open, then there was really, they'd be running to the beach and back and forth all day long.
Yeah.
Once they closed through traffic to break out, it really changed Forest Street for the better. Even though I'm not saying it's a good situation now, okay? Any other questions from the board?
Have you guys had any updates on the test excavation in regards to the gas line?
Yep.
Sorry, I
So
forgot about that.
we did about, let me go back.
Again, for the record, Sean Reardon with Tetra Tech, civil engineer. About, I think it was Tuesday of last week, we did about a half dozen to 8 test pits under the supervision of the gas company, specifically to identify how high the gas, or how low the gas was in the ground, because we have to maintain certain separations from utilities and from roadways. So we have that information now. We're looking at it to see if we need to tweak anything to make sure that we're meeting their requirements. But if we have any changes, we'll let you know about them.
I think I remember last time you were here, you weren't sure, you were gonna check and see if it was 250 or 350 feet away on the blasting part of it. Did you confirm what that number was?
From,
How for if somebody's going, they're gonna test somebody's foundation and such?
Oh, right.
Was it 250 feet or was it 300?
I did not check that, no.
Okay, that's something we just need to confirm.
I can find that. I can probably Google it while I'm in the
Okay.
crowd. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, because it's part of the standard blasting permit.
Right.
There's
right.
also a distance requirement for if you're blasting within a certain distance from the highway. And I'm
Okay.
pretty sure that's 250 feet. So if we're blasting within 250 feet of the highway, we also have to get a permit from them as well. But I'll check for that.
I know, yeah, we definitely have to get a highway permit, we've talked about that
All
already.
right, but you were gonna check, I think. It was some, I know there was, some homeowners who worried if they,
Yep.
you know, what the distance was.
We'll check that.
Tom, it's 250.
Pardon?
250. The number is 250.
It's 250 pages. Okay.
I'll send you a bill.
So it said,
It's gonna be expensive.
Any other questions from the board? That you can think of right now?
I just want to get some clarification on the number of parking spots. On the peer review here, there's a new comment, number 13, about this parking letter. So the letter we got from Letter by Logan LLC claims that it would be in non-conformance with the 175 space requirements under the shared parking bylaw. There's a response here that the proponent disagrees. Do we have any sort of worksheet that backs up the number?
Yeah,
That backs up the number and why it's in compliance?
so as part of the set, there's a zoning summary table and a parking summary table. And under the business highway sub-district, there's an allowance to calculate your parking requirements under a shared scenario when you have a mixed use. So it's basically the zoning bylaw recognizes that when you have a site that's shared by, for example, an office building and a residential building, that their peaks don't overlap. So what your zoning does is it defines 4 or 5 different scenarios during the day where you assign a percentage of the required zoning under the bylaw to those windows. And then you take the highest window, so the period of peak demand. And that's the number of parking spaces that you have to provide on the site. So it doesn't speak to how you share the parking, it just defines how many spaces you need to provide to serve that use. And the requirement is 355 for our particular use when you look at the square footage of the office building and when you look at the number of units in the residential building. At the peak time of the day, we need 355 spaces. It doesn't say how you share them, we just need 355 spaces. We provide 384.
Yes, sir.
I'm not sure if you're all done. I was going to add something to the parking question if I could. Well, everyone, Mark Kornitsky, I represent the hotel, which is located next door. And I think I brought this issue to the attention of the board when I wrote a letter maybe 6-8 weeks ago. And I still continue to disagree with the petitioner's analysis of the the Saugus bylaw. We're in agreement that there's 355 spaces required, The issue is the shared parking portion of the bylaw. The garage has 339 spaces, 125 of which are dedicated to my client by easement. So we still agree that there's 214 spaces in the garage that would be available for this shared parking analysis. When Dan Dumais looked at the issue and he did his report and introduced it at the last public hearing, he agreed with my analysis at that time. And he calculated that you could not look at the dedicated parking, the 33 spaces in Building A, the 30 spaces that are allocated in Building B lower garage, the 73 spaces allocated in Building B surface, because those were not available for the office building to share. They were dedicated and assigned purely to the residential use. And he calculated that the total non-allocated spaces are 296 and are less than the 355 required shared spaces. So the result of that is that it's 59 spaces short, which is my argument. In his most recent comments, he sees it purely as a legal issue, because Paul Haverty, he wrote a letter middle of May, and he took a different position, and that's, I think, some of what you heard right before my comments. The petitioner argues that the table that has columns as to how you allocate for different periods of the day, that it's not a analysis of what's the minimum shared parking number. Despite what it says in the bylaw says you take the highest number of any of those columns, and that's your minimum shared parking. I believe what the bylaw says is that they only have 296, because that's the math. It essentially gives a 40% reduction for the residential parking. It's really the office building that comes up short. I don't believe that the problem is fatal to the petitioner's request for relief here. I think they need another waiver, and I just suggest that they should be transparent and say, okay, we have a minimum of 296 spaces, and perhaps more depending on how it's interpreted in the bylaw on the shared parking. But at 296, we need a waiver so that this board can evaluate the petition with it being 296 spaces. Jeffrey Dirk wrote a letter where he said, oh no, there's plenty of parking. I think his analysis really goes towards looking at it with the deficient parking, not having the number of spaces that were earlier suggested by the petitioner, but rather the 296. He's saying, I believe he can apply and give you the rationale for you to make that determination for a waiver. But I'm just looking for the petitioner to look for that waiver and to tell you, yeah, we have a minimum of 296 if you interpret it that way, perhaps more otherwise, and a bit of a technical point. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I would, I don't disagree. It's an interesting legal technical issue, and my brother...
If you can come up and...
Yes, sure. Attorney Christopher Alphen, Blattman, Bobrowski, Haverty, and Silverstein. I think this is an interesting question. We're happy to look at it, but as my brother just said, the question is whether we need to request a waiver or not. So we'll review that. If we need a waiver, then we'll request a waiver. But ultimately, before the board, the question is there sufficient parking or not? And we have peer review letters on that issue. So we're happy to review that issue to see whether a waiver is needed or not needed. And certainly my brother brings in some interesting concepts about the technicalities of what counts as parking or not. But we're happy to review that and table that and come back in the next meeting and answer the question of whether we need a waiver or not.
Okay.
Actually, in reality, we are, hopefully after this meeting, we've been waiting to revise the waiver list because we want to make sure that we have all the comments in from everybody, and we're hoping to leave tonight with permission to draft a decision and update the waiver list. So whatever waivers we need, we're going to ask for, those waivers.
Jesse, do you have a comment to this?
So I guess I want to bring a an aspect of this that's not being talked about by either side, essentially. I want to remind the board members that your authority to grant waivers is limited to the project site itself. It doesn't extend to the site where the garage is located. So to the extent the peer reviewers and the engineers are saying that there's enough parking, that appears to be the testimony for the project itself. The question for the developer, and this will be the subject of a condition I expect, is that they will be required to demonstrate zoning compliance for the existing parcel that's not part of the 40B site. And that's not an issue where they can simply request a waiver, because that's not within the board's purview to grant under this 40B project. So that's something I think for the developer to be mindful of as they move forward. If they have a zoning issue, they may need to separately obtain zoning relief for the garage parcel, as they would for any other work on that parcel itself. This board cannot grant permission with respect to that parcel.
Okay. Can I ask a quick question? But this does meet the requirement of a mixed-use development, given that
I think it does.
Okay.
I think the issue that the MDM was raising is whether the office use has enough parking to be compliant with zoning in view of the fact that the office uses are not going to have availability to use the parking on the apartment side. That's the issue that they're.
But you're saying, wait a minute, you're making an assumption that the office building is not going to have the right to go on to the residential parking. I don't know that decision has or hasn't been made.
And it's subject to the discretion of the management company to use it. But we have identified certain allocated spaces that we intend to allocate. So in order to substantiate the 1.67, we have certain ones allocated. But that being said, we're fortunate to have a lot of history on the existing office buildings. So unlike the residential building, which we have to forecast, the office building we have decades of history on parking. It's fully tenanted right now, and we have plenty of extra spaces in the garage that are not being used. Less than 100 spaces being used by the office building right now.
The reason I bring up the parking to begin with here,
Yep.
Mr. Chairman, through you, the reason I bring this up is I've heard a few times that now that, the office building is fully occupied and there's plenty of parking. Okay, that may be the case today, and that may be the case for the past 30 years.
Yep.
But things change. There
Right.
may be something that goes in there next month that draws lots more cars for whatever reason.
Understood.
And
So what I want to do is make sure that we're correct here by zoning, because you're surrounded on two sides by a cliff, you're surrounded on another side by Route 1.
Yep.
And on the other side by Hockeytown, which is gonna be inaccessible.
Yep.
There's nowhere else to go.
Understood.
You're landlocked, there's no alternatives here.
okay, with all due respect, there are alternatives. With all due respect, there are alternatives here. The hotel has basically offered to sell their 100 of their parking spaces back to the developer. So that is always an option.
Okay, that's not an alternative that's been presented to us.
Some of what is going on here with the hotel is a little bit disingenuous. We have tried to keep the discussions, above board at this particular point in time. But, there is parking that's not being used from the hotel, and that, when you say that there's not an alternative, there 100%, are alternatives. We don't think it's necessary. At the end of the day, I understand you want us to satisfy zoning and satisfy waivers. We will make sure that that is done. But from a practical standpoint, there isn't a concern on the development team for either the office or the residential.
Nor is there a concern in my mind that we meet zoning.
Yeah.
So your shared parking section of your 21D zoning is very efficiently written, and it is clear. You are required to provide a total number of parking spaces. It makes no mention about how that parking is to be shared, or that all of the uses must share equally. For example, if I had a mixed-use project that had 5,000 square feet of office and 400 units, not reasonable to expect that all of the spaces would be shared. And your zoning bylaw is written beautifully. So whoever wrote that section did a great job, and it's explicit. It says, okay, look at all these different scenarios that consider the fact that from 10 o'clock till 6 o'clock in the morning, the office is using, in this particular case, there's 9 spaces that are set aside for the office during that period. So during the period where the residential building, you could expect everybody home, There is a portion of the office that we're supposed to set aside for that. And that's the beauty of your bylaw. It says, okay, if you have a mixed use, you have to provide this number of total spaces. And to your point, it's exactly why I think they weren't explicit on how it needed to be shared, because to your point, things change. And the operators of the facility need to be able to juggle how that share happens. As long as they have the total number of spaces available to them for the mixed use, they should be able to solve that problem. And in this particular case, the attorneys for the hotel suggest that, well, the fact that it's under the shared parking scenario, that all the parking spaces need to be shared, that's clearly not the way the zoning bylaw is written.
Thank you.
Go ahead, yes, sir.
If I could just comment on a couple of things. So first, I am unaware of there being conversations about my client selling spots to the hotel. At the last meeting, I approached Attorney Haverty and I said, please feel free to give me a call. My client may have additional parking that they could give up for their use. Now, the point you make, Mr. Riley, about there being changes, we don't know what will happen with the hotel parcel either in their easement right onto this garage for the 125 spaces. Are they going to need them all at some point for that use or a different use? In terms of your bylaw and the point I made earlier about being able to, the claim that you could cherry pick the column, the bylaw gives instructions on how to calculate the shared parking in number 3. The column.
It's total parking.
Can I please, I didn't interrupt you, and I would just ask for that respect, please. Number 3, the column total having the highest total value is the minimum shared parking space requirement for that combination of land uses. I don't think it could be any clearer. I've got copies of that section if you would like. And it's number 3 on page 2. Thank you. Thank you. One short upstairs.
What's that?
But that's what I wanted to reply to, and
Okay.
thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Tom, I had a question on the spaces going up the slope that were 10% grades that aren't ADA compliant. Is that total number of spaces included in the total number of
Excuse me?
parking spaces?
Can he just
Because
identify
I don't think it
himself?
should be.
Can you come up here to,
I'm kind of trapped in here. I'm just asking.
I understand,
No, is he a town official or an abutter?
he's in a butter.
Breakout Road. My question was about the spaces that going up the road to, by building B there, the 10% grade. Are those spaces included, 50 or so spaces, included in the total number of parking spaces that aren't ADA compliant?
Mr. Red, can you answer that?
Yes, they are. So, and they're not on.
Should be.
Yes, because the accessible spaces, which have even really stringent guidelines, those are.
Let me say, are they supposed to be included?
Yeah, there's dimensional requirements for parking in Saugus. There's not slope requirements for parking in Saugus. And we,
Yeah, there are. They shouldn't be beyond the 5%.
5 grade, yeah.
To me, they shouldn't be included in the total number. That's all I just wanted to say.
we agree, there's, in our response, there's a practical range where you like spaces to be. So for example, in retail applications where you have a lot of turnover, you really don't want your spaces to be more than 4%, and that was mentioned by the peer reviewer, because, right, these are unfamiliar, high turnover spaces, but in this particular case, we have parking spaces that are, I think, upwards, I think the highest is about 7.7%. And in parking garages, for example, there's guidance, building code guidance on parking garages, which allow you to park on the ramps in garages, and those ramps can approach 7.5%. So we're about the same, our worst case scenario is about the same as the steepest is allowed in a parking garage.
So what are they gonna be percentage-wise?
They're all over, they're all over.
I think the peer review said they were at a 9 pitch versus.
No, we looked at this,
So if they're
the
not
steepest one is, I think,
compliant, how could they be
7.8%.
counted?
They are compliant, so the accessible spaces meet the minimum slope requirements. the parking spaces that we count towards our total meet the dimensional requirements of the bylaw.
Okay.
So they all, and from a general standard, we've given examples of why they're within the range of acceptable solutions. Yes, there are gonna be spaces that are gonna be less appealing than others. Fortunately, all those spaces serve the residential use, which are people that are gonna be familiar with those spaces and can choose. We have 34 more spaces than zoning requires, so, you know, if there are ones that people feel less comfortable in, they don't have to park there. If people have bigger trucks, they can park in certain spaces. If people have more comfortability with other stuff, they can certainly choose. In some of the spaces that are steeper are a little bit closer to the building too, so, you know, maybe it's okay for some people, and, you know, they want to exchange that steep parking for a little bit closer spot.
All right, thank you.
Mr. DePietro, there's a seat over here if you wanna
No, I'm
go
good.
get some.
Thanks. Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I don't know if it's possible, but would we be able to get our council's opinion on the bylaw for bullet point 3? Because my interpretation of it is it's the title of the bylaw is shared parking, and I'm reading it as the word total, which the gentleman was referring to. It's the total column, it wasn't total parking. I'm interpreting it as shared parking. Is that
Which point are you on?
number 3 under shared parking, where it says the column total having the highest total value is the minimum shared parking space requirement for the combination of land uses?
Are you on the MDM letter?
This is on the bylaw that was just handed out.
Okay, so
And I think that's what you were referring to, is this section of bylaw, correct?
Right.
can you repeat what you're looking for?
Yeah, on the back of the first page, it says on the shared parking, there's 5 bullet points. The third one was the one that was in question, the column total having the highest total value. That one there.
Yeah.
So-
Yeah, I can review that and issue a recommendation.
So, okay, my interpretation is the word total is referring to column and not total parking spaces.
Yeah.
Hence, the headline of that section is shared parking.
But the section is shared parking, which defines the scenario by which that applies. So for example, you can't use the shared parking scenario in a project that doesn't have the requisite components. So we interpret it differently, and I use that analogy that if I had, let's say, 500 square feet of office space in 600 units, it wouldn't be you wouldn't presume that all of those spaces would need to be shared, right?
Correct.
It's as long as you've demonstrated ability to meet the minimum requirements, that you are allowed the opportunity to administer your parking supply, because to Chris's point, as long as we have enough spaces, we should be able to administer it within the guidelines
Well,
that we have.
that's my main concern, is meeting the bylaw, but I just want to make sure that we're actually going off the correct interpretation of the bylaw, and we have a, coexistive interpretation between us and the petitioner.
Yeah, I'd like to review it
Okay.
and get back to the board with a
Excellent.
recommendation on that. And I think from hearing the conversation, really the board has a couple of things you need to decide on. First of all, are you satisfied that the amount of parking is sufficient for this project and for the other uses that are sharing the garage spaces? That's a factual question that the board members will need to make a determination on. Separately, this issue about the shared parking and the waivers and the times and the ratios, I will get back to you with a recommendation, but I am pretty satisfied that this is something that the board can address through a condition in its decision that requires certain things with the developer before a building permit can be pulled. Specifically, for example, demonstrating zoning compliance, demonstrating that they have sufficient parking under the analysis that the board makes as to the shared parking.
Thank you.
Moving on from parking.
Sorry.
You want to have your
Yes.
architect?
I just have one question before you get off
Sure.
parking. I'm just curious, where do visitors park? Is that in the number?
Yep.
Or how many are visitor spots? Or are they designated on the property, not in the garage? Or where's visitors park?
Yeah, on our last responses to the peer reviewers' comments, we made additions to the plans that designate visitor spaces. I think we have, Jay, was it like, I want to say 25 or 30, but we have them designated as well as we have delivery spaces designated. We have EV-ready spaces designated. So they all the spaces have a letter on them to tell you where they're allocated to. And just so you know that when you do zoning calculations, the zoning calculations includes, so when you're required to have, say, 100 spaces, it's enough spaces for the use, the tenants or the users as well as the visitors.
One more question on parking.
Yes, sir.
How is it gonna be 40B if you're selling or renting the spaces in the buildings, in the garage?
Yeah, that's not a civil question. That's a
That's a
building question. Yeah.
Yes.
Can I just confirm I'm hearing this right? So what's being asked of the project is that all of the spots that they anticipate to need for residents and for deliveries and all that stuff, all of that number is supposed to be available outside of the building, the parking garage structure, or is it what they're gonna build on the property as well as the leftover after the hotel is satisfied? Does that make sense? Like, I'm not sure.
It does. Yes, so the parking requirement that we need for the new residential component. So the existing office has 100% of its spaces in the garage. There are no,
Which includes the hotel.
correct.
Together.
But the hotel has a lot of at-grade spaces itself.
Yeah.
So there's 339 spaces in the garage. 125 of them, but as I understand it, are dedicated to the hotel by easement.
Yeah.
So we took out those 125 from any of our counts.
Yeah.
So we're left with the 214. So we have the 214 in the garage. Then we have on-site at-grade spaces, and then we have parking below the buildings.
Yeah.
The total of which, the 214 plus all those others, is 384.
Between the garage, the under the building, and then on just.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. And all of those would be available for a pool of shared, a pooled scenario of shared parking that can be used between the two uses. But some of which, because the residential portion is so much larger than the office, it's about 3 times as much demand. A portion of those are going to be dedicated dedicated spaces for uses only for the residential folks.
It would seem more efficient to delegate them and assign them so that it's a cleaner coming on the property, finding your spot, not having to do laps.
Right. It is, and it's
Management, it's gonna be
yeah,
dealt with by management.
and it's a little bit of a and sometimes it changes too, depending on the tenants you have and depending on how full your facility is.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is we are confident and the traffic consultant is confident that we have enough total spaces. The question is there's some questions to how it gets used, but that's as long as you have enough spaces, it's
Does that
we'll figure
assume
that out.
1 per apartment or 2? What's the number?
1.67 per
apartment.
unit, even though we have a high percentage of one-bedroom units. So even during our conversation with the traffic consultant, they were surprised that we were at 1.67. They thought it was more about 1.25. So we got to the point where everybody agreed in that meeting that, yeah, we have plenty of parking. It's just more a question of how it's being assigned than anything else.
Mr. Chairman? I don't know if you can speak to it or if we can ask for some type of snow removal plan. My concern would be taking up spots with snow or a thaw and refreeze, making spots non-usable. I used to be in the snow industry for years and I'm guilty of covering tons of spots. Your property just doesn't have the spots to give up.
Right.
So is it gonna be snow removal at every storm over a certain amount of inches? Are there designated snow piling areas? That's, I know this might be a management topic, but it's also gonna impact parking.
Right.
So there's a gray line there.
Yeah, and fortunately on this site, the boulevard roadway that we have coming up from Route 1,
That I'm not concerned about, because you can snow roll that off to the sides.
right, but there's also about a 34-foot area of just open space that we
Okay.
could use very easily for stockpiling snow.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then my
But
other,
at the, excuse, I apologize, but at the end of the day, management is gonna have to make sure it's clear. They're gonna have contracts with snow removal
Well-
companies, and if you wanna put in some sort of, a condition, if whatever, snowbanks get to a certain height, they need to be removed.
well, my
it can be
concern would be,
handled that
especially
way,
against the
too.
back of the property, piling snow against the back could damage the vegetation barrier,
Right.
Yep.
especially mixed with salt, that'll
Yep.
go right through them, so I think that might be a condition the board may be interested in, maybe no piling snow along the forestry side of the property.
And the water
Definitely
basin,
reasonable.
Yeah.
because that's gonna, at
And
some
the
point
runoff
filter
of any
down.
chemicals,
Yeah.
any de-icing chemicals, including salt, could, from down the hill standpoint, damage our resources as well.
So actually, that might be a question too, is any of the salt, is there any filter for that on the stormwater runoff, or?
No, the only solution for salt is not using it. So
Okay.
there's no way to filter out salt.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's why you see those in areas where you have a reservoir, you have low salt applications on highways. It's really, there's no way to remove it. It gets suspended
Okay.
in the water. Yep. But what we will have is that area that we spoke about, that area drains to our largest detention pond. And that's a water quality feature, so that will help improve water quality. If the snow is stockpiled in that area along the boulevard entry, all of that area will end up flowing to the large detention basin.
Is that the one in the back right corner of the property?
Correct, yes, yep.
And then that will be spread along forestry, but more on the right-hand side, correct?
I'm sorry, say that
The
again.
water will be dispersed going towards forestry, but on the right-hand side?
Correct, yes.
Okay.
After it's allowed to infiltrate and after it's detained within that large basin, yes.
Okay.
Anything else on parking? Okay. Any questions from the board at this point? What issue would you like to address next?
I think you have your architectural peer reviewer here, maybe he wants to do a presentation.
Okay,
Mr. Chair, you also have your civil control.
Hi, I'm Cliff Palmer. I'm the peer reviewer, the architecture peer reviewer. And I don't have a huge presentation, but I want to start with a little chronology, just so everybody remembers that I issued a second letter on May 24th that came 2 months after the first letter. And in response to that May 24th letter, there was both a response from the landscape architect, I think it was the 29th of May, and that was followed up by the architect who's here tonight on June 3rd. So that's where it stands at this point. And I want to just make a little introduction about what my focus has been, and then I think I can give you sort of summary comments and what I think is still left to do. So from my perspective, my primary goal is to make sure that the project has been sufficiently described so that the board can really make an informed decision. And I think if you read through my comments and testimony, that's really what most of it has been focused as, getting more documentation. So at the end, when it's finally pulled together, there are really no surprises either for you, and the abutters understand to the greatest degree possible what the proposal is. And the latest two letters, so I guess my kind of summary is that those last two letters from the landscape architect and the architect did respond, I think, sufficiently to my latest concerns. It's not necessarily the same project any number of people would design,
And I don't think you've seen radical changes in the design, but I think you've seen a lot of small incremental changes that were responsive to my comments, to civil comments, and traffic comments. So I think from that perspective, I think I'm done with my analysis of that design. The building itself is well designed. It's extremely clever. It adapts to the site. My preference would have been perhaps looking at a single scheme building, but that was studied and rejected for various reasons. Given that need or the decision that they had to pursue that two-building scheme, I think it was resolved as well as it could be in that. So that I think is important to put out there. What I am assembling right now is suggested conditions for you to consider for the decision. They consist of primarily really combing through information's kind of come in from different directions that I think are fair to assume were commitments that have been made by the applicant. And there are a lot of them, and they range from the school bus shelter to dark sky compliant light fixtures, but they're not all in one place. So I just want to make sure that none of that gets lost in drafting the decision. So there are a number of those. That's primarily what they are, really, is making sure that nothing gets missed. And then there are just a couple very subtle things where there's still a couple things not jiving. A good example being the commitment for a solid wood fence on the neighbor's side of the street, where the landscape drawing says provide a solid wooden fence in areas where fall protection is required. My pushback on that is I think you really should just put the solid wood fence along that whole run along the Forest Street neighbors, in the situation where the driveway is higher than the neighbors. Small things like that, but I think they're important. Other commitments that have been made are like the design of the retaining wall using rusticated stone. They're all things that you've seen, but that's what I'm suggesting would be the best use of my time at this point would be, and I think I'm about 90% done with it anyway. So I think that's where I'm at. And if you've seen the two letters, I think especially a couple of the, I think, agreements that were made actually were in the landscape architect's letter back. I think that commitment to doing a tree protection plan really is important, particularly for the immediate abutters. They're important things, and I think you've noticed that my focus, I've been concerned about the appearance and scale of that retaining wall. There was a new document that I found really useful, which really cited how tall the wall is at every abutter's location, an extremely useful site. It's not an obvious plan when you look at it. It's not clear that the wall's retaining on one side for part of the run and retaining on the other side and how that looks physically. But I'm satisfied now that I understand pretty thoroughly how the site works. And I'm essentially done asking questions about it. But I'm here to answer any questions you may have, and I already mentioned to Jesse, he and I communicated about assembling suggested conditions. I'm not an attorney, so it's going to need, I can express concerns, and I'm sure your counsel will tell me how to phrase that, but that's where I'm at this point.
Thank you, sir. Any questions from the board?
Thank you.
Okay.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, one of the bullet points from the DPW director was the applicant must commit in writing to properly maintain the infrastructure, including sending information to the town engineer on a semi-annual basis. And the response was that essentially, if we put that as a condition, the applicant would be inclined to do so. Is that the correct interpretation of that? You guys would?
I mean, there is a stormwater management plan that is part of our submission that the owner of the building must follow. So there already is something in writing that says what should be done. As far as report, you're asking whether or not they want to report if work has been done? Is that what the?
It seems as though he just wants an update semi-annually, making sure that all systems are maintained, maybe like a service record.
How often do they service them?
I mean, that's really not a heavy lift.
I mean, I think, I guess given that they get serviced every year, maybe perhaps an annual update would probably be a good, place to fall on that.
Okay.
And that's to the DPW director. Yeah, and the issue was that those comments were written during the Pell stage before the stormwater management plan was submitted.
Okay.
But an annual update to DPW director is something that we can certainly live with.
And just for clarity, everything on our site is the responsibility of the project. Nothing is going to be maintained by the town or the responsibility of the town.
Yeah, no, that's evident. It's just a matter of making sure that it is actually maintained and it doesn't get dilapidated.
Could I make one more comment?
Sure,
As I said, I'm working on my list, and one came up tonight actually due to comments Mr. Riley made and Federico made, because they coalesced in the issue, your comment, Chris, about the no space on the site. That was actually one of the last lines in my letter. It's like there's kind of no room left up there, so everything better work right. And your comment about snow storage, and I think that it is common to have a snow storage plan. I've seen that with many.
Keep in mind, we have very few at-grade parking spaces. So this is a large site. 85% of our parking is either below the building or in a garage. So snow removal
Right.
for this large a site, we have 90 some odd spaces, I think, on site, somewhere in that order. There's not a lot of snow generated, and we have a huge area out front that we will have zero problem managing snow on site.
Well, again, I think you'd acknowledge it's not an unusual request, though, for snow storage. Even if it isn't specifically only related to losing parking spaces, it is damaging landscaping materials potentially. I'll just put that out there. It's not an uncommon drawing to be submitted as part of this process.
Yeah, and it's not just the parking spots, it's the road. It's a fairly long road that you've got to plow all the time. There's where the gentleman on the fishing club about, someone mentioned that the salt's not, the only way not to have the salt run off is not to use salt, right?
Correct.
So that's gonna go somewhere. I know you mentioned earlier, but I think it would be helpful to have that type of plan, or at least a brief presentation on it.
I guess I have a little trouble understanding what the request is, because under normal circumstances, we just want to demonstrate that we have the capacity to manage snow. In a lot of 40B projects, there is no space, and all the parking is at grade. In this case, we have room to manage snow. If you want to understand particulars about what we intend to do with particular things, I can certainly respond to that, but I don't think we're in a position right now to say, well, we won't use salt, because then it becomes a health and safety issue, particularly as it relates to this site, right? So we don't want to be too narrowly defining what we're doing at this point. We're at the preliminary plan stage. But if you're at all uncomfortable about anything that you think we don't have covered, we're certainly happy to tell you how we would address that.
I don't, to your point, I don't necessarily think we need anything at this minute.
Yep.
But you know, a large, or, you know, one prominent concern on this site is that you live right next to a pond, which is, you know, there's a group there who's been present every meeting.
Yep.
Has raised a lot of fair concerns, and to the proponents' credit, they've taken steps to reduce the size of the retaining wall. So I think they're, you know, I think the proponent here is trying to be a good neighbor with regard to the fishing club. The gentleman from the fishing club also said, you know, if there's salt, that could run off, that could damage the pond. I just want to make sure that, and I don't think it's the case, that the retention pond we're planning to put the snow is going to run down into the pond. I think you said it's going to run toward Forest Street, but if we can capture that, then that's something that we can approve. But right now, it's just word of mouth that says, yeah, it's probably going to go in that retention pond that's closest and it's going to run up to Forest Street.
I think we do have a response to one of Phil's comments, but we can certainly, I guess I'm struggling with how to give you the information. I guess we could just do a brief description of what our intended policy is, but.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay, all right.
So basically, to add to that, I do believe that the shrubs or the plantings along Forest Street will be adequate to block light going into Forest Street as people are parking and pulling out of the spots. My main concern would be not damaging those shrubs with snow. I know there's different types of salt. Go ahead.
The fence is on our side of the property, and the greenery that we're putting in to grow is going to be on the Forest Street side, on the other side of the fence.
So there's no shrubbery at the parking level?
For residents, there may be, but you
But
were
the fence is
bringing up,
currently the fence is only where the fall hazards are, and then the shrubbery is blocking lights onto Forest Street, correct?
I'm not sure what happened with our landscape plan, but I do know that our intention is that fence be all along and that green wall be all along, because that was part of the original special permit for the office building. So we want to write that.
So if the fence goes the entire length of Forest Street, then
Yes.
the shrubbery is irrelevant because the fence will block the light going to Forest Street from headlights, correct?
Correct.
Correct.
And the shrubbery is going to be, for the benefit of the residents, the buffer is going to be on the residents' side.
You're right.
That'll be blocking the site of the
That's what
fence.
she has, okay.
Yeah, so,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
as
we do
long
have
as
it, yeah.
there's some type of barrier between the property and Forest Street for
100%.
vehicles pulling in.
Yeah.
If the shrub's dying and it's facing the property, it would be nice to have them replaced, which I think you guys committed to,
Yeah,
but,
we basically said within, that we are happy with any kind of a condition, that if anything dies within whatever 6
Yeah.
months, depending on the season.
my main concern
it'll be
is
fixed.
somebody getting home at 2 a.m. shining high beams in somebody's master bedroom. I wanna make sure that's not an issue for the folks on Forest Street.
We are very, I think we talked a little bit about that last time, we're very comfortable with not being concerned about headlights flashing onto Fourth Street.
Okay.
And I'm pretty sure that we covered that at the last hearing. But I will rewrite that condition down about the shrubbery replacement.
And Lynn, what I'd propose to do is, after this meeting, we can take the snow comments and any other comments and sort of roll them into some responses to the chair and submit a letter just to clarify those things.
That'd be helpful.
Yeah, we do have the stormwater report, to Lynn's point. It does have a section on snow management and things like that, but it might not speak to all the issues you talked about. So I'll take a look at it and sort of give direction as to where that information might be found, or otherwise restate it for you.
Thank you.
Shrubbery. Right.
Oh, yeah. So a couple things with the snow. Is there a concern about the weight of the snow, the weight on the snow over the gas line? Because I know they said low-growing, low-rooted shrubbery. If we all reflect back to 2015 where we could never get out from under, it just coming. Is there a situation where they can set up literally drive the snow out? Because I can just picture somebody who's been plowing for days on end because of the storms. They're going up and down. You get to the point where you're like, just stick it anywhere. And they may do it just out of ill-informed or unaware, next thing you know, it's heading towards the anglers, like what's the buffer there for the anglers and where they put snow if they were putting it? Like just thinking worst case scenario about where you would manage all of that, if it's staying on property and you have that kind of storm again.
Our team is in constant contact with the pipeline people.
Yep.
There is no scenario under which we would push any snow onto the pipeline. We have 2 crossings over the pipeline. That is why the testing was done last week, to see how deep it is,
Yep.
to see the conditions of the soil that's on top of it. So I can't speak anymore except to say we don't envision putting snow on the pipeline. We would not be allowed to put snow on the pipeline. The pipeline is going to have landscaping on either side of it. Maybe it's a 30-foot swath. Then we've got another 10 feet on either side before we get to buildings. So that is just, I just want to like nip that. That is not being contemplated. There would be no scenario where we would push snow from our site onto the pipeline.
Yeah, and to the original point, you couldn't stack snow high enough to do anything that would damage the gas line. Yeah, I mean, if you could stack it, 200 feet high, and it still wouldn't have enough weight to hurt the gas line.
So, remind me again, the perimeter driving, it goes up the hill, which will then cross the pipeline, right,
Yeah.
at some point, and then it goes around again and crosses it again before it
Yeah,
comes back down?
Well, because it goes to second building.
Yeah,
So it crosses behind the hotel, across the sliver
Yeah.
parcel at 961, and then it crosses up at the hill, yes.
so driving like plows and big trucks and whatever going up and over that obviously isn't factored in.
Correct, and that's the reason the gas company has concern for separation between the roadway grade and the gas line.
Okay, and
Because
then-
as it gets deeper, the load gets smaller and smaller.
So what's the buffer between that road, I guess, and then going to the edge where you get to the anglers? Like, I know the wall is.
The road is,
Like, what's the height of the wall when you're on your 0 grade? And then going up from there?
the wall's tough to say, because the wall's, it varies from 0 feet to
Yeah.
20 feet.
On the
So
angler side?
anywhere from say 2 feet to 10 feet. But that wall is about 150 feet, 160 feet from the angler's property.
Is that that?
Yep, about 100
Oh.
feet of which is still gonna be wooded.
Wait, sorry, so 100 feet from the wall coming into your property, or 100 feet going the other way? So like if you're coming from the anglers, you go up the hill, you hit the wall, then how many feet till the driveway after the wall and you're on your property?
I'm sorry, I have no idea what you're asking.
Yeah, what is your concern? That might be helpful, maybe then we can
Oh, let me
figure out what.
elaborate. So if you're at the anglers and you get to the wall, you're walking up the hill to get to the wall and you're gonna go.
So
on the
wait, so I'm
property.
walking up the hill from the anglers
Correct.
towards the wall, okay?
Yeah, you climb the
Why
wall,
would
you're up.
somebody be doing that?
I'm just trying to give you perspective in a second. So you hit the wall, so you're at the wall between the two, right? So you're guessing about 2-3 feet at different spots, the height of the wall if you're standing on your property, on the road, right?
Yep.
So
You're-
what I'm
you're
trying to
looking down.
visualize is a plow guy or girl going around that and pushing the snow, and unintentionally or whatever, that some of that snow would then end up scooting up over the wall and then working its way down to the anglers with the salt and.
That's right.
Right, but I mean, that's what happens today. A portion of the site drains to the angler's property. And
But
that,
it's not snow clearing with,
right, but again,
salt.
but snow doesn't have salt in it. The runoff from the roadway has salt in it.
That's what I mean, you're building a road. So you're gonna.
But is
you're
it a snow,
plowing-
if I'm plowing snow, the
Correct.
snow doesn't have salt in it.
Correct,
What has salt in it is the runoff from the roadway once the snow is plowed. So salt is not a component in the snow. Salt is a component in the runoff once the snow is gone.
that's applied to the ground cover.
Right, correct.
So then it snows again, and now it's working its way through that system, and you're piling it, and you're piling it, and then it's melting, and then it's working its way, not necessarily into the basin.
There are very strict stormwater standards which dictate how you manage runoff from sites, which we comply with. We have a document that's called the Stormwater Management Report.
Yeah.
That's been reviewed by the civil peer review consultant, it's 200 pages, of which it deals with snow removal, it deals with stormwater. We meet all the requirements of those standards. I can tell you right now, the snow does not add salt to anybody because salt is not in snow. The salt is in the runoff on the road. That all goes to the detention basins, and the detention basins are sized and designed to maintain minimum water quality standards. Salt, unfortunately, is one of those things that you can't, once it's suspended in water, you can't extract it. It doesn't settle out. The only way to do it is do a desalination plant, which doesn't, you can't even do it for drinking water. So in this case, the typical decision-making is either use salt or don't use salt. Use a different type of salt. What I can say is we would typically say we'll be sensitive to that, but in this case, we don't want to do anything that says we are not going to do any particular de-icing methodology because of what we have. We have a very steep road. We have to maintain fire access. So all I can tell you is that we comply with the standards for stormwater management. I don't perceive there to be a salt issue emanating from this site, largely because, again, there is very little pavement. So one of the really good things from an environmental standpoint and to the angler's concern, if we had another project that didn't have underground parking and didn't have a garage, we'd have another 300 spaces on site, 340 spaces on site, all of which would get runoff from pavement, all of which would get de-icing chemicals potentially from managing that surface. Instead, we have very few at-grade spaces. So the net result, in comparison to a retail project, we have so much less runoff that has contaminant in it than anything else, even on Route 1. So from that standpoint, it's a much better scenario for the anglers.
Yeah, and the town's peer reviewer is here. If you're not, you feel like you need another opinion on that matter, I don't imagine that they're gonna be pushing snow up over the retaining walls as they're going around the curve. That's what she's suggesting.
No, in all likelihood, because of the nature of this site, it's gonna be managed and it's gonna be taken off site rather quickly, or stockpiled down in the area that we're talking about.
Well, that's what I guess part of my thing is, it sounds like it would make more sense to have to physically remove it and bring it to, sometimes they put it in old parking lots or something, that 2015, they were throwing it in the harbor.
Right, that's a case-by-case basis, and that's certainly a quiver in your case, so that if it comes to that, that's certainly an option. It's typically not the first option. First option is to find a place on site where you can safely stockpile it and let it melt.
Yeah.
And then when it melts, it ends up going through the stormwater management system and ends up getting whatever treatment it can. But we wouldn't commit to saying we're going to plow the roads and immediately remove it, because we really don't need to, because we have options on site for its disposal.
I just think it's pretty plausible that after applying the salt and the next storm, it's going to be present and it can work its way. So I just think it should be something to think of, that it can work its way down the hill, just out of continued residual, and not that anyone's doing it on purpose, but you're working around the corner and it just kind of splashes up and over, and it's only a couple feet.
If that were the case, where you guys have that 100-foot buffer, essentially, a wooded area, would the salt or water not essentially filter into the ground before it reaches the anglers?
Without question, it would.
Okay,
Right?
so
But again, it's a question of degrees. If we salt the road and we get a 10-inch storm of rain, the water's going to come up, it's going to stage out, and there's going to be salt in that runoff. But from a practical standpoint, no. In most cases, that salt's going to be either contained within the pond or it's going to filter into the ground as it travels from the detention ponds to the angler's property, or from the detention ponds to forestry. But I'm not going to tell you there's never going to be salt in that runoff, or it's never going to meet the pond. But it is part of the management scenario that we're required to design for, and it's been done according to standard.
Mr. Chairman, I think it might be beneficial to ask our peer review if he has any concerns in regards to snow.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. For the record, Phil Cordero from Allen and Major Associates. Just to speak specifically to the snow issue, I agree with Mr. Reardon's summary that he gave to the board relative to stormwater management. He meets all of those standards, and that a properly managed system funnels water into their detention basins. They take care of it, and they've met the standard of care here. Where I disagree, and hopefully they'll add this to their information, is I would recommend, I agree with Mr. Bolmer, that some discussion, even narrative-based, on how they plan to manage snow should be added to the documents, because it's a barometer by which this board can ultimately judge their compliance once the project is built. And without that, there's no guidance. There's nothing for you to review it against. The snow management, again, I agree with Mr. Reardon. The long boulevard driveway really does accommodate movement of snow efficiently. They do have a very large storage area off to the side, so there's no discussion on those concerns. There is the likelihood for some salt-laden snow removal, the salt being picked up from contact with the ground, that may be on the westerly side of the site and may ultimately flow down the slope towards the Malden Anglers Pond. There is a lot of ground contact, though. A lot of that soil contact and the infiltration will take care of that inherent salt problem. There may be some nominal increases over what's there today. Obviously, it is by and large an undeveloped site. But I think the distances that the project does have, it doesn't pose a very serious concern to the water quality or to the abutters on Forest.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yes.
Thomas Liu, Vice President of Malden Anglers. I guess my concern is, and by the way, thank you for acknowledging that we've been here and we're very concerned about that. From what Sean said, if I address your first name, right?
Yeah.
Okay, is that the salt doesn't go away, right? So if we have storm after storm and snow after snow, as we do in New England, the salt will accumulate on that, and there is a chance that we know that snow by itself does not have salt in it, but the snow could apply enough water on there to carry the salt down to our pond. The pond would not be able to survive any salt in it. Trout, bass for that matter, cannot take a salinity level higher than 0.0001, which is a very, very tiny amount. So that would be devastating to that particular area. We've been engaging counsel who recommends that we look at a hydrology study to see what that looks like in terms of that runoff. And we're also very concerned that because we have a aquifer here where we're looking at aquatic life, that the Conservation Commission has not been engaged at all. We understand that that is because we're outside of the 150 feet limit out there, but that has been measured based on the start and stop position of the pond. Things like water runoff or salinity coming down from the hill would not, like truckle like a waterfall into our pond. So I would stress to you that the line of delineation to wetlands may be further toward the developer's petition space than it is right up to the edge of the pond. And we would like to have a little more time to explore that, either with an environmental engineer or hydrologist who have been recommended to us in order to accomplish that, or to have that as part of the conditions of the petition, whether that be using environmentally friendly salt products or no salt products at all, or as this gentleman addressed, we are able to review a snow management plan. Thank you.
This gentleman went exactly where we're very happy to go. We have no issue with there being a condition that we explore salt alternatives as a condition of the permit. We did go to the trouble and the expense of having the wetlands line delineated. So, we have to, it was witnessed by the town, and so we have no problem with going with the alternative if that is the will of the board.
Anybody else on that matter? Right, and then we can move on to, I believe, our civil engineer was here tonight also. But he may have some comments.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. For the record, again, Phil Cordero. I don't have very many comments. I guess to sort of echo Mr. Bulmer's presentation style, we don't have a formal presentation for tonight. As a reminder, we did issue a review letter to the board with comments back in March, to which the applicant responded in May. And that May letter resulted in a lot of conditional changes to the plans. There were improvements, but it also resulted in a lot of commitments that the comments we raised will be addressed and itemized and identified on the final plans. And just as a reminder, we discussed at the last meeting that I was at that 40B plans are technically considered preliminary, although we're forensically tearing them apart to get as many details as we can out of them. So sometimes the best thing you can hope for is to walk away with a condition that says, please make sure this is detailed. And before the project is constructed, those plans have to be re-vetted to make sure they've complied with that condition. It's very common, and we would actually recommend that for you here as we're going through the process. What we didn't have at the time is I did have a chance to sit down with the DPW director and the town engineer and the water superintendent, who had expressed concern through me that the letters that they had written, I guess during the project eligibility letter process, didn't find their way to the applicant. I'm sorry?
Who was that to them?
I guess it's maybe 3 weeks ago now.
Okay.
So it was about a week after I was in front of the board. I can get you the
Okay.
exact date if you'd like, Mr. Chair. So their concern was their letter hadn't found their way to the applicant, therefore the applicant was going to be tone deaf to responding to their comments, and this board may issue a permit without consideration of that town department of which they had raised serious concerns. So we had forwarded the materials to the applicant. They received it, and obviously they did respond early this week. In their response, they agreed to a lot of the conditions. Some of the letter at this point from the DPW is dated because it was written about a year ago and the plans have advanced since then. In the process, they've committed to meeting those conditions, but then they also will state that they'll abide by whatever conditions this board imposes upon them through the comprehensive permit. So that's a very important step. What I would recommend is, I have not seen any responses. I've not had a follow-up conversation with the DPW director, and I think it's important that this board hear from them just to make sure they are in agreement to those comments, and I'm happy to participate in that and just make sure there's a path laid out. I will note in there that in the applicant's response to the board, there are several matters that they are requesting waivers from the town standards for both construction and fees. Those just need to be identified for this board to discuss and deliberate upon.
When I had a conversation with the town engineer on Monday, he is looking for conversation.
Yes, he is very
He's looking
clearly.
for
Yes,
very
Mr. Chair.
open-minded, but looking for conversation.
Yeah, and I think the letter goes a long way toward that. They just hadn't heard from the applicant, and sometimes silence is deafening, and they were struggling with that. I think we're in a good spot that a follow-up conversation can be coordinated and we reach resolution, such that through the DPW director, I'm happy to also participate, just like Mr. Bulmer, which is to suggest and list out some possible conditions for this board to consider upon your deliberations that will satisfy the open items that were on our peer review, the DPW concerns about things going forward that you should consider writing into the condition of permit here.
So we have
Hold on
no,
one
if the board, we can't do something without sort of your permission. If the board wants us to set up a meeting with Phil and our expert and the DPW as a follow-up to this, we're happy to do that, but it would be uncomfortable for us to make that first step.
I think we should
Outside.
make that step, Chester, do you agree?
What do you mean by that, Tom?
Set up for the town engineer, the DPW, and the petitioner all to get together?
That's something that's pretty commonly done. Yeah,
Yeah.
that can be a way to kind of cut through.
Yeah, I think that's what we need to do.
We're happy to participate in the Zoom call. I don't know, Phil, if you want to work on that, if that's okay.
Yeah.
We'll
Yeah,
follow.
I'm happy to set it up, and it's very common to do these
And it'll be the town-
workshops.
Not just the DPW director, but also
The
the
town
town engineer,
Yes, sir.
and get everyone together, get the communication flowing.
You've got it.
Is the
Take care of
big
it.
thing.
Thank you.
Okay, that sound good?
So I don't know if the board had any questions, otherwise I'm happy to
All right, yes, sir.
Just want to clarify for the record there, the proponent said that the town was there at the time in which the markers for the environmental engineers were set up. They were not.
They were not? Sorry.
Okay.
My mistake.
Not sure.
Sorry, just for clarification on that, our wetland scientists went out and delineated the wetland boundary as required by the methodology required by the Corps of Engineers and by the Wetlands Protection Act. So we have scientists that go out there, know the rules by which they define the edge of the resource area. It is not as simple as saying it's the edge of the pond. You have to look at soils, you have to look at vegetation, but our scientists delineated that boundary. We located each one of those flags with the GPS unit accurate to within a foot, so we are very confident in that boundary. There is no requirement that it's witnessed. What would happen is if we were doing work within jurisdiction of the Conservation Commission, we would have to file with them. So that's still the case. If we're working within 100 feet of that resource area, we need to file with the Conservation Commission. If we don't have to file with them. If we do file with them, they'll probably go through the process of confirming our delineation, but otherwise there's no requirement for a witness.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
will you guys be updating the wetlands prior to the start of construction? Because my understanding of wetlands is it's essentially like a living organism. They grow and retract. I don't know how rapidly, but your delineations now could be different than possibly a year and a half, 2 years when the project actually starts, or am I wrong in assuming that?
They move geologically. They don't really move that quickly, and particularly in this situation, we've got basically an old quarry pond. The edges are very well defined. There's no, usually what you have is like in a farm field that's really flat. You might have some encroachment depending on a wet season or a wet few years, but we wouldn't expect any substantial migration of that wetland boundary.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
At the same time, there are marshy lands on the east side of the pond. You were there, I think, when we walked it together. And I think Gene was commenting that there was fauna and foliage there that was consistent with swamp area. And that area, you did mark outside of the blue markers for the pond. And we don't understand why that should not be considered wetland.
I can't speak to the location that you're talking about. I can tell you that our wetland scientists, this is what they do every day, and it's foundational to the regulations. So I have a whole bunch of confidence. If you have a question, certainly shoot me an email, and we can get a response for you. Picture would help too, if you don't mind. Yeah.
I'm sorry, what's your name again?
Tom.
Civil engineering.
Pardon?
Civil engineering.
Civil engineering? Would you, wasn't that,
The next topic.
is that we just?
That was, if you had something else, I'm happy to address it. That was.
Okay. No, if that's what you want to address, the civil.
That's
Yeah,
what
no.
we're moving to.
Yeah, that's what I'm moving to, the civil end. Didn't we just do the civil end, yeah?
I think we covered, among other things, part of it, was that all of it?
Is that all this, were you complete?
So we are effectively complete at the moment. Again, their letter either made revisions to address our comment or offered the commitment to make the changes as part of the final design. So you will see all of the comments ultimately addressed. I guess the only question for the board is whether or not you are comfortable crafting the condition that allows them to add those details later on in the process. It's not uncommon to do that, as the design progresses. So we are effectively complete for the moment.
Mr. Chairman.
But we're gonna set up the meeting with the DPW and the town engineer and.
Lynn's gonna facilitate that, correct?
Yeah. I'll facilitate it on your behalf.
We will make sure that our team shows up,
Okay.
Mr.
or at
Chairman.
least Sean.
Yes.
One last question. And just because the DPW director mentioned this, and I didn't see it on the plan, so he specified the construction of the roadway having I believe I can't find it in front of me at the moment, 2.5 inches of binder, 1.5 inches of hot top on top of that. 6 inches of crushed and 12 of dense grade, or vice versa rather. I didn't see it on the plans that I have in front of me. Is the applicant meeting the roadway criteria?
So one of the comments that we have is there are a lot of details that weren't provided on the plans, including cross-sections like that, and they're asking to provide those at a later date. The DPW director is applying what appears to be the town standard with the dense grade and the base material on there. I guess we could ask the applicant directly if it's their intent to comply with that, or if they would seek a different section.
Actually, this is an easy one. So our detail, in response to Phil, our original filing with the ZBA didn't have construction details. To respond to his request, we added those. One of those is a pavement cross-section that is identical to what Brendan is asking for.
Thank you. Just out of the,
Admittedly, I was surprised, right? Because I read it and I was like, oh, I'm going to have to explain why it's different. Then I looked at it, I was like, wow, it's exactly the same.
I know it's a minimal impact on the project, but just as a courtesy to the DPW director.
Yeah. No, and there is it's like in one of the back pages, and it's up in the top left. It's just a little cross section that says exactly that: 1.5 inch top, 2.5 inch binder. I mean, it is exactly what Brendan asked for. So
okay, thank you.
Yes.
So when the 40B residents are getting their permission to move in and their price structure to move in, I'm assuming this includes their parking space, or are they paying extra for parking space? And if they do pay extra for parking?
That's a management thing.
Okay, but the reason I ask is.
Usually, I would assume
that
they pay for a parking space.
I know some
That's an
properties,
assumption.
they show you, like, you can choose extra parking and then you pay extra. The reason I ask is if it doesn't come with the apartment, but then they end up needing to buy or purchase or rent it, does it push them over the value of a 40B?
I live in a 40B project on Route 1 myself.
Yep,
I'm not in a 40B unit,
yep.
all right? I pay for parking, I believe everyone pays $50 for a parking space, it's not, but that's a management company thing. I don't think that's something, I think Lynn's gonna say that we're determining how they're gonna handle parking right now. But I'm
Just to
assuming
keep the
that they would
price.
probably pay for a parking space.
Yeah.
Some units will want two, some will want one.
The parking will be unbundled from the unit. That's the question that you're asking, so that you'll pay one thing for rent and one thing for parking. However, in most instances, with regard to the affordable units, they are typically given one parking space with their unit that they do not pay for.
Okay, so they'll still qualify for 40B.
Yeah, which will be reviewed by the state as well.
Yeah, okay.
There'll be a marketing plan, blah, blah, blah.
God, I did. Any other questions from the audience? Any questions from the board? Attorney Schomer, anything to add right at this point, or?
Well, I think it would be helpful to sort of tally up what at this point the board feels is necessary to get, and the items, the to-do items for the applicant.
Yeah, exactly.
You've got testimony now from all three of your peer consultants that some additional information about site management is necessary, and I recognize that there's an inclination to say that these issues are just management issues, but at this point your consultants are recommending more information be provided as to snow management specifically and as to parking management. So it's up to the board to determine whether to request that information at this point now from the applicant, or whether to have those matters be conditions of your decision. But I would urge you, whichever way you're looking to proceed, to let the applicant know what you expect of them in advance of the next hearing, with sufficient time, of course, for your reviewers to review any information that's provided and for that to be vetted by the town department.
So I'm inclined to think less conditions the best, and the more we can get out of the way, the better.
One thing that I suggest, Mr. Chair, it's pretty typical in a complex project like this is for there to be a draft operation and management plan that explains all of these operational issues from a preliminary perspective. Of course, they don't have a management company yet, but they will have some sense of how they intend to handle these things. Things like situation raised by your traffic consultant about how do you make sure that the residents are not occupying too many spaces in the shared parking garage on the commercial site. Things like that, and how they would expect to handle those. So that in my view, would be a reasonable request for the board at this stage, to handle those kind of operational issues, so that you have more of a comfort level that the applicant is at least thinking about preliminarily how they'll handle those questions.
We have no issue preparing a letter over the next few days and submitting it to the board about how we're going to manage snow and how we're going to manage parking at a very preliminary level.
Okay.
We don't see those as very high hurdles at all.
All
And
right.
certainly, we don't have any issue with there being conditions that there be a detailed construction management plan, that there be a, there definitely were suggestions, and as your peer reviewers both said here, there were conditions, that they have written into their reports, but I don't know from a substantive standpoint, other than those two issues, that there's a lot more that we can address.
Mr. Chairman, question for the council, would you also extend that, and I don't know if it's too early in the game, but move in, move out procedure as far as parking, package delivery, such Uber Eats, things of that nature?
I've seen all of those things covered in that kind of a plan. I've also seen preliminary construction management plans, trucking routes, things of that nature for excavation and removal and import of fill. Ultimately, it's the discretion of the board to determine whether you feel that information is needed at this juncture. But I've certainly seen it in other 40B projects.
Thank you.
Mr. Allen, did you hear something?
Yeah, I mean, the couple of things that we just mentioned, we have already asked for, we already got a commitment from for the next meeting, the snow plan, parking plan, and Attorney Shumby are gonna get us an opinion on the bylaw. Yeah. I do think that having the draft management plan would be helpful.
I'm sorry, what?
I do think that having the draft management plan would be helpful for the next meeting.
Could I politely ask for a timeline, or in terms of, does decision day have to be done in 60 days? Is that what the board's?
The 180 days are coming up very, very quickly in July.
We have 180 days to make a decision.
Is it, we have about 60 more until we reach that?
We have
I can let you know
about 40 days, right?
Through you. The deadline for the board to close the public hearing is July the 15th.
Okay.
That date signifies the last date when the board can receive evidence from the public and evidence from the applicant. The board then has 40 days to deliberate and meet publicly to come up with the conditions and the decision that you will ultimately issue. But I would caution you that once you do close the public hearing, and caution the applicant as well, potentially, once you do close the public hearing, the applicant and members of the public will not be permitted to contribute in any way. They can't provide evidence, they can't answer questions, they can't provide documents, they can't argue one way or the other about what they feel are appropriate conditions. So we're coming up, as Lynn mentioned, coming up on the 180 days. If the board hasn't already requested an extension of that, and if you feel there's need for additional information, we're getting very close to the time when the request should be made.
You saying your request for an extension to July 15th?
The board has until July 15th to close the public hearing.
Right.
That date can only be extended with the agreement of the applicant.
Okay.
Is there a
Sorry,
deadline
could you
on the
say that
extension?
again, please?
It would have to be before that.
Just before July, it could be July
Agreement
14th.
of the applicant.
So it has to be
No,
a
we
joint.
haven't
Speaking of having all names, we'd appreciate the time to be able to prepare our questions.
We've been coming
And if there is an extension, is there a standardized time period for an extension? 30 days, 60 days, whatever?
No, I wouldn't say that there's a standard, it's really just how much time is needed.
How much time do we need to get the additional information in?
We're getting, I think, pretty close to a point where at least the peer consultants are largely satisfied that they've been responded to. That's ultimately up to the board. Are you satisfied with what's been provided? Are you satisfied with that these issues of concern that the peer consultants and yourselves have raised have been addressed or can be addressed through conditions? So personally, my view is that we're getting towards the point where we're close to it. So if we were in a position where the board members were saying, for example, we can't see approving 189 units on this site, which we haven't heard thus far, that would indicate to me that there would be a need for a greater extension than perhaps now. So under the circumstances, the developer has been receptive and has worked with the board and the peer consultants. And I think that the board has been receptive as well and responsive and moved through the process expeditiously. So if there's need for additional time, I would suggest to all parties that be considered.
We're not willing to consider that at this early date. We would be very happy to come back in a couple of weeks and knock off the couple of issues and start working on the decision. But we just don't see that issues that were brought up this evening are, to the extent that that they're gonna, bring us all the way into July. We would really like to get to work on all of the different conditions and updating the waiver list. We'll get you something within the next week. As soon as Phil sets up the meeting with the DPW, our team will be there and we will get you the memo on a couple of items that you've asked for. But we've been showing up, as you have been showing up, for a very long period of time. And, that date is 5 weeks from now. So we will consider something at the next meeting.
If we need it.
If we need it.
If we need something.
Yeah, I would think that we
Well,
would,
let's see how the next, let's see how the next couple of weeks go.
But I think that we need to get to the end of the substantive discussion, and you have heard from all of your peer reviewers that they're satisfied. So this is not a heavy lift for our team over the next couple of weeks.
Well, with respect, we also have to consume the information that is going to come out for parking plans and snow removal plans, and construction plans as well, to be able to verbalize or construct any conditions we may want.
Mr. Chairman, through you, is there some sort of a deadline by which we would have to request this extension?
You would have to receive an extension before the end of the public hearing. You can ask for an extension at any time, including this moment, including at the next hearing, the last day. They would have to agree to it in writing.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
as a courtesy to the anglers, they were discussing the possibility of hiring some of their own experts. Just to clarify some things for them, I'd be curious to see what they would like as a timeline, not saying that we could actually accommodate.
And you mean, what type of time, all right, that's a good, fair question. What kind of timeline are you thinking?
Get a hydrologist, which is what we're contemplating, I'd say 30 days.
That puts us right at the deadline. I'm not sure if it's something that we can accommodate.
I don't know if something we can accommodate. I think that what we should do right now is continue this hearing for a couple of weeks, and at that time, we can take a look and see if we're gonna need an extension of things. This question I don't have the answer to. I mean, we've heard the peer reviews feel where they are right now on the conservation issues down there, and not trying to hurt Malden anglers, not against Malden anglers,
That's been more than fair.
all for them. I'm just saying, I don't know if we have the time to delay it all for hydrologists
Mr.
type
Chairman,
profession.
a question for our council.
Yes.
If they were to hire their own hydrologist, would we be able to consider any of that information as factual, or do we have to disregard that?
No, you could consider it. If they file information, it would be the same as if the applicant is filing information or a butter filing a letter. It's all evidence in your record. Can only be considered up to the point that the public hearing gets closed, though.
Right, once the hearing's closed, that would be
the end.
precluded.
That's the end of all evidence from any party. And at that point, it becomes essentially a conversation between the board and me as to what the decision is then.
So we would also need the conditions from our peer reviews before the 15th as well.
Correct, yeah. And I get the sense that Phil
That'll be
and
accomplished.
Cliff are well on the way of having that.
Thank you.
So, my thinking is we continue this hearing at this point and give the petitioner a chance to answer the questions and get some more, get that meeting set up with DPW and the engineer. And in a couple of weeks, we'll know if we even need to extend it all. Is the board in agreement with that?
Yeah, I'd agree. I think that, I mean, the couple of weeks, I mean, it sounds reasonable. It's gonna be dependent upon the availability of all of the parties to meet, and then have a few days for us to get their inputs. So those days stack up pretty quickly.
I know that, I
A
know.
couple of weeks brings us to our regularly scheduled meeting also.
Our regular scheduled meeting is the 26th.
Could we do the 25th possibly? Because I don't know that we want to push it into 4th of July week. And traffic was wonderful tonight.
Wednesday was good traffic.
Wednesday, much better than Thursday. Much better.
How is the board's availability on June 25th? It's a Wednesday.
I'm available.
Chris?
I have to check with my supervisor.
Well, because I
It's
know
probably okay.
it's a heavy week for us because we have the 25th and then we're right back the next night with our regular
Yeah.
meeting.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I'm okay as far as I know.
I might have, I got something going on that night.
The 25th is not good for you, Bob?
No.
All right,
That's not good for me either.
it's not good for you either.
Not that my availability is.
So that's okay, I'm glad you. Um,
24th?
There's no selectmen meeting that night, is it?
Oh, actually, yes, there is.
24th,
You have a meeting on the 24th?
Could be the 23rd. Monday. That would be really easy. What was wrong with the 25th?
Mr. Northrup can't make the 25th, Dr. Mr. Jesse can't make the 25th either. So we're back looking for the 24th or the 23rd. 24th is selectmen meeting, the 23rd, to Monday. At least then we have a few days off before our regular meeting.
I don't mind doing it that night, but I'm not sure that this meeting we're talking about is gonna be scheduled and concluded and have inputs to us before then. There is a holiday in the middle there. That's only, what, less than 2 weeks away.
Lynn, do you think you're gonna be prepared by the 23rd?
Yeah, the meeting we're gonna have with the DPW I'm sure will take place next week. It's gonna take place by Zoom, right, Phil?
Hey, we could be flexible too, we'll figure it out. But
Yeah.
We'll try to work with the DPW to get it set up very quickly, before the holiday.
So it looks like it would be either the 23rd or 24th are the dates that, 24th is selectmen's meeting, I'd rather not.
Right, and Sean can't be here, and I think he doesn't need to be here.
Okay, so the 23rd seems, no, Jesse?
Sorry, Tom.
That's okay. I'd
I
rather-
don't mean to.
At this
break
point,
up.
I'd rather have you, Jesse, here too, because
Sorry, I
as
have
we get
that
down
right.
towards the end.
Well, they have their regular hearing on Thursday.
I'm not available on the 26th.
Yeah, it's a long hearing that night.
Did you want to put it on the night of the selectmen hearing, which was the 27th?
The 24th?
24th, but that's the night you can't come.
Do you need to be there, Jesse?
Do you want to push it to the 30th?
Monday the 30th?
Yeah, I think that's
Monday the 30th, is that good with people?
4th of July week, so I don't really know what people
That works, fine.
That works for everyone, Monday the 30th?
Check the book.
All right, so Monday, July 30th.
And that gives you a little bit more time to get your responses ready too. So everyone seems to be good for Monday the 30th, yes.
Sorry, just real quick.
You're
So
not
when-
good?
Yeah, well, no, I
Only
won't.
teasing.
On the 30th, assuming that's the meeting, so they bring all of their fine tune, right, on the 30th, it gets discussed, and then that's the last window for anybody to chime in with any tweak questions, is that correct?
You, no, you have until July 15th.
So we'll probably meet again after the 30th with any
There
refinements.
could be a meeting between the 30th and the 15th.
Okay.
I'm trying to, really taking them one meeting at a time right now.
Does that work for you, Peter?
Being that 30th work for you?
30th can work.
Thank you, we appreciate it.
And we'll, I think we'll probably, he is fine, isn't it? I don't think you'll need to do presentation, so I think doing it right here will be fine.
30th? 30th, yeah.
30th.
All right. Mr.
Do I
Chair,
have
just
a, yes,
one, before you close, just one additional to-do item that Lynn mentioned, and I want to make sure that you do have that before the next meeting, is the updated / final waiver list. Because the board, to the point that Phil raised earlier, you'll want to consider the request for waivers of local bylaws that they're requesting. And just as a reminder, if you haven't looked at the original list, they did request some pretty broad waivers. So I think it's important for you to have a sense of the final list.
so Lynn, did you hear that?
Yep.
Yes, we did, understood. We will update
Okay.
the waiver list.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, can I ask a real quick, Mr. Chair, can I ask just a real quick status question before you close? Just curious to direct to your counsel through the chair, was there ever a resolution to the question on the deed restriction that was brought up in the last couple of meetings? I'm just wondering what the status of that is and how that affects your
I'm
timeline.
not sure what you're referring to.
The height restriction that was going back into the old litigations and the question of deed restrictions during.
In 40B overrides and deed restrictions.
Okay, thank you.
Am I saying that right, Jesse?
I'm not sure what he's referring to, actually.
The allegation, there was an early allegation that there was some restriction put on the original development of the property.
Oh,
Right,
that was. had
it's
to
a
do with
question for the
permit
council.
condition,
Thank
I
you,
think.
but it's a question for council.
Oh.
That's resolved?
It's resolved to the extent that it was discussed that the board has the authority to waive conditions of prior permit.
Okay, thank you.
They, as we talked about before, they would need to request that, and their original waiver list did not, so council is in the audience and is listening to this. I'm sure it'll be reflected in that the waiver list.
Okay. So do I have a motion to continue this hearing to
Motion to continue to June 30th?
Monday, June 30th at 7:00 a.m.?
PM. Yep.
PM, sorry, right here at the Town Hall Annex. And do I have a second for that?
I'll second that.
Okay, I guess I write all those
Doesn't matter. We're putting
in
it
favor,
on
say
the-
aye.
Aye.
Say it's like one company.
Okay, so that
Thank
part
you,
of the
Mr.
meeting
Chairman.
is
Thank you, the
through. We do have, some other issues that the board's taking care of that
Okay.
are unrelated to that project. Give them a minute to- So we're gonna discuss calls after, and sign from city, but before we do that, if you don't mind, use the restroom.
We adjourned.
What?
No, we're not adjourned, we're continuing.
We're not adjourned.
We're not adjourned.
We're not adjourned, I'm just, before we continue, though, I'm just gonna. Surprised I'm the only one.
Lost your audience.
I know, but we're still on TV.
Yeah, you want to do a recess?
No, I think we have to Like, I think we have to televise. I wish we didn't, but I think we have to.
Am I,
It's rolling.
am I asking too many questions?
No way.
Am I like going off on like crazy tangents asking these questions? No. No?
No,
What's that?
No. Any question you want to ask that relates to anything germane to the project is appropriate. Okay, I mean, you can't ask him what did he have for dinner,
Right.
you know, but just about anything else is can be worked.
Yeah. It's gonna be your name that's on the decision, so ask anything you need.
That's fair.
Laptop on camera.
Oh.
So, thanks.
like, can I tell you not to recess? I probably should have told you to recess. Yeah, we're going to move on to discuss the 44 Collins Ave situation. The first thing is, and Attorney Jesse can confirm, and I discussed even with John Vastapolo this week, that when this board gets sued, you don't have personal liability. I just want to make sure that everyone understands that. The only thing that you could have personal liability on, I believe, would be an act of fraud or bribery or something illegal along those lines.
Okay.
But personally, you're not gonna get yourself in trouble or be due for legal fees or lose your house or anything like that. You don't have that type of personal liability. You agree with that we're all protected from that. The second thing, and it's just a matter of way some things happened. Jesse wrote a decision on Collins Ave. And one way or another, I don't know how it all happened, and I'm not sure, and I don't want to point fingers, but the petitioner's attorney got a hold of it before any board members even signed it. I don't know how it got supposedly stamped in without any signatures on it, and then filed suit based upon a draft. I mean, that's where basically you agree, meaning that's where it sits right now. And I was on a call, and Jesse was there along with Town Council John Vastapoli and the town manager. And what's the best avenue, which is the best route for this board to take with this lawsuit? And right now, I think it's a united front. And basically, there's basically two decisions out there. I know there's our narrative from that meeting that night, and there's what Jesse wrote up for conditions, in which they're suing on one of those conditions. And what's being recommended is we signed the list of conditions that Jesse wrote up in that decision and go forward with that. And for the time being anyway, I would, and I'm putting it that way, is to disregard the narrative of that meeting that night. And it just appears to be at this time, and things change as this goes along, things are gonna change, whether it comes to a full-blown lawsuit or something gets settled, but then beforehand, we can't even speculate on that, or what's the best course of action we have right now. I feel, I mean, we serve at, we serve the selectmen, they appoint us. And I'm hearing through the Board of Selectmen and such, that their action is to go forth and sign what Jesse prepared, and for us to move forward on that. Jesse, you want to add anything to that, or?
Sure, so the draft that I had prepared, I thought it was drafted consistent with what I was at the meeting, and I went back and re-reviewed the board's conversation about it, so I believe the draft was consistent with what the intentions of the board were. So if that is correct, then the board members can go ahead and sign it as it was drafted, but only if that's consistent with what you feel was determined by the board.
Well, I think we all felt that night that when we said yes, we were all thinking it still had to go in front of the Board of Selectmen for it to, be followed through with. Don't you agree with me when I say that? Weren't you feeling that way?
That's what was discussed. Yes.
I don't think you sat on it, Frank. You weren't voting. You two didn't vote on it, so.
I commented, but I did not vote.
Right, okay. Stephanie and John should actually be, I believe that John's already signed, as I did, Jesse's version.
Just as a follow-up, Tom, it isn't that the board needs to disregard the narrative, the minutes of your meeting, but that would be supplemental to what you issue in.
That was our intention.
Decision. Yeah. So I don't think they're inconsistent, and it's not that you're disregarding what was discussed or stated.
Okay.
But it's not strictly necessary to have the minutes in the decision itself. That's part of your record, and so if the developer chooses to appeal the decision, they'll ask for all of your records from your file, and the minutes will go in there, and they'll see what the minutes were, and they are what they are. They're on TV as.
And they'll see our intention was.
Yeah.
That we approved it thinking it was still gonna go forward to the selectmen for its final approval. I think at least my vote might have changed on that if I didn't think that way.
Might as well.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Is that not how the bylaw is written though, too? The bylaw says they would have.
That's why they'll, that's the thing for the lawyers, Frank, that's what that's why there's a lawsuit, right?
The bylaw, it's a strange situation because what they're asking for was a variance for height, but the bylaw says you need a special permit to go to a certain height, but not above this height. So they essentially need two forms of relief, was what we talked about at that hearing. One from this board, one from the selectmen. And so my understanding of what the board's wishes were that you were granting the relief within your lane, and then they would have to go to the selectmen to get the relief that they need from them. And that's essentially what the developer think. They don't want to do that. And that's the reason why they filed this very unusual lawsuit. I've never seen anything like it where they're essentially appealing a unsigned draft decision. Very, very odd.
And I don't know how it got stamped without signatures. I just don't know why that procedure would be in place.
I don't know either. My understanding is that it was in the town clerk's office for the board members to sign just as a matter of convenience, and so maybe it was just inadvertent that it got stamped.
We're gonna go back and we'll get back into the convenience thing about signing at the clerk's office is gonna change too. Peter, does that make you feel better from how you were feeling yesterday?
No, it does not.
Okay.
In more than 25 years of sitting on this board, I have never been advised legally to not sign the minutes of the meeting. in this particular case, my feeling is what's going to happen is when this goes to court, a judge is gonna refer it back to us. And if I were the judge, I would look at what's been filed, which doesn't give any reason why we granted the petition in the first place, and say, what the hell are you guys doing? You signed something that doesn't give a reason why you did it. Doesn't that seem, you made a decision, but you didn't say why? That's what the minutes are for. They explain why we decided the way we did. And by not signing those, it's gonna be a glaring omission. It is gonna come back to us, there's no question about it. The judge is gonna say, hey, go back to the board and ask them to clarify what they're talking about. If we sign both, I don't have a problem with that, but not signing it, is the lawsuit based on the condition, or is it based on not having filed within the time frame?
It's based on the condition. So the draft, it does have a very detailed explanation of the board's reasons. So what I would say is if you feel more comfortable including as an exhibit to the decision your minutes, you can certainly do that. But it's not necessary to do that. And the board will have to vote ultimately to approve your minutes in the normal course that you do at every meeting when you take a vote to approve the minutes. Stephanie not being here, she hasn't completed the minute, I understand, so that'll happen.
We're pretty sure she has.
Actually,
I think she, I don't have that, I'm looking for it, but
Okay.
I believe she does have the narrative.
Well, in any event, it hasn't been approved by the board. Am I right?
I don't believe it's, we were told not to sign it.
We don't approve minutes.
You don't approve minutes?
No, we sign the decisions. To me, that's the approval of the minutes.
Okay,
Yeah.
so you consolidate them both into one. It's pretty typical for a board to have a regular agenda item where you'll actually vote to approve the minutes as drafted by the clerk. So that's,
We don't usually do that.
Well, this meeting might be a good example of why.
yeah,
Because we're not going to vote on anything yet.
Yeah.
That should be included in the minutes.
should be, yeah. It's a good idea to have that as a regular course of business. And, to your point, Peter, about it is important to have the minutes and to be approving them, but when your decision only consists of the minutes, you could find yourself in a situation like you're warning about, where a judge is saying, what are your findings that you're making? If it's not clear and specific that I'm making this finding, this finding, this finding. And sometimes you do and sometimes you don't, but the decision can really flesh out exactly what you want the condition to say. So that's why I recommend generally, you can certainly include the minutes in the decision itself, but also having a statement of, here's what happened, here's what we voted, here's the conditions, very, very clearly and specifically.
Okay, but, do you agree that when this goes to a judge, he's gonna send it back to us?
Based on the decision that I drafted, I'm comfortable with it. And the reason why I say that is because I was very specific about the findings that you were making in granting the variance and about the conditions that you were granting the variance in accordance.
I disagree.
Well, we can, as I said, we can certainly include the minutes as part of that decision, if that would make you feel more comfortable. And then the judge, as you say, would have everything right in front of them. I can certainly revise the decision to add the minutes to it, and then, I think you said you would be more comfortable that way?
I would certainly want the minutes to be included.
Okay.
Because I think the minutes are vital to explaining why we made the decision that we did. Without that explanation, I don't think the judge would think we had a basis for making a decision.
Okay, well, as I said, I'm happy to add those, and if that would be make you
Well,
more
if we're signing both, then I don't have a problem with it.
All right, I don't have the, Stephanie, I believe may have, I can look.
I have them, I can get it and I can send them back to Stephanie and to
Okay.
you to make sure that you have everything in one place so that it's
Okay,
ready
she's
to go.
doing it until Monday.
Yeah.
Peter,
Um, but I'm around.
Okay.
And I don't have an issue with coming in here,
Okay.
tomorrow or on Friday.
are
It's
you,
in her desk.
are you suggesting we sign
Both.
2 decisions here? One with the
So
added
what-
condition,
What
one
I'm
without?
suggesting we do, we'll have the decision, and then it'll refer to the minutes, and that'll be kind of like an exhibit to the decision. So it'll be one decision that you're signing, including the conditions, including,
minutes.
and including the minutes, all in one document
All right.
that you all sign.
Okay.
So,
So if it's all there, and the discussions we had, including the issue of, the questions you had about the staffing, that kind of thing, that should all be in there. And should all,
yeah, I'd agree. I just,
yeah, should all
I'm
be
trying
part of
to
it.
distinguish whether it's one thing we're signing or 2.
Yeah.
Because it's 2 different stories, right?
Right,
So I just want to make sure it's one thing.
yeah.
It is.
That makes sense.
Right. It's almost saying like you have Jesse's with the decision with the minutes being an addendum to them. It's almost saying it that way, correct?
With supporting evidence of the decision.
Supporting
Yeah.
evidence or whatever, but everything's signed by, on both sides. You'll prepare that, Jesse?
I will.
So
Okay.
I won't worry about signing what I have in front of me now.
Yep, no need. I'll
Okay.
take care of that. And,
And with Stephanie's out tomorrow and on Friday, don't hesitate just to get to me.
Okay,
And I can, although this building is closed Fridays anyway. So, nobody's here on Friday, so,
yeah, maybe we could, if it doesn't happen on today or tomorrow or Friday, you still have time. We're not particularly close to the deadline, so if it
Yeah, I
happens
don't-
next week,
I
that's,
don't know where the deadlines were in filing for it. The only thing that we can throw back in there, I can remember early on, when Stephanie had a medical problem, Mr. Magnan, who is, he has some relationship with the petitioner, but I don't think he's the attorney of record on this.
I think that's right.
But he's still involved in some way. I had mentioned it, he's a local guy, I'm saying, look,
He's a-
Stephanie we need extra time, Stephanie has a serious medical problem. And he said, I hope she's okay. I mean, I don't think we get beaten up on that point. I think he'd do the right thing on that. At least he would. I can't speak for the rest of them down the line, but I know that Mr. Magnan would, I trust Rich to say, yeah, I told him we'd give him the extra time to get things together, and then the next 2 days later, the other guy's filing a lawsuit.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think we can rely on.
So I don't know how
Rich to do
much
the right
that
thing.
he's involved in it, or
Okay.
who the petitioners listen
What about
to.
the issue that the decision is not being filed within the 14 days?
That's
So-
what we just talked.
For the variance, you need to file the decision within 100 days
Okay.
of the application being filed. So you've got a couple weeks on that. So
Okay,
if it doesn't happen tomorrow or Friday, if it
So
happens
Monday's
next
okay.
week. Yeah.
I mean, that's the assumption that Stephanie's here Monday.
Okay,
We go into that more
Yeah.
when we're offline. But I know she's not gonna be here the remainder of the week. But not like I'd be around tomorrow, so we have a plan anyway on that. Okay? And the other thing is, and that's why I have some decisions for people to sign here tonight, they're the made decisions. And we're not gonna use the clerk anymore to go have the decision signed down there. We're gonna have you come in here and sign at Stephanie's desk. I mean, we can't have what happened on this one where a petitioner filed suit on a draft. And somebody stamped something in and, it just got too lax with, and I'm getting guilty of this myself and Peter and signing for each other and this and that or whatever. We just have to play it clean and get in here to sign. And those of us who work, which are few in between Chris and Bob anyway, and usually it's
That'll be
local.
tight.
I'm always available to, you know, Stephanie might leave at noontime, but this place is at 4. And if you've gotta come in at 6, I have no problem coming down, picking up papers and meeting you here to have somebody sign after hours. That's easy enough. Could say buy me a beer, but I don't drink. Okay?
Would e-signatures be legally binding on these? Is that something to maybe explore, or is that too?
From the town's perspective, it's fine. The problem is for the developer, they'll need to record it in the registry of deeds, and so the town clerk would need to authenticate it, so
It's
physical signatures are unfortunately better practice.
okay. I was just thinking that might be easier for people, e-signature. That's fine.
You know, we'll do physical signatures.
Yeah.
And the only other thing I wanted to after we get, you know, the May decision signed before nobody leave in a hurry, is I just want to talk about next month coming up and variances and everything else. And we've got to get a little bit better, a little bit more thorough on how we just, instead of just saying, you know, the variance is granted because topography and the shape of the lot and this and that. No, let's name the hardship in our narrative. Say because it's a pie-shaped lot. Say because there is a topography situation. Say because there's a soil issue. Or the size of the lot is small, but we want to put the reason right in the decision. Not just because of, you know, not just, you know, saying some line.
We had a decision that.
Want to get better at, want to get better
Narrowing it down?
with our decisions.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if it's gonna be because of the shape of the lot, then say that.
Okay.
Not just go through the topography, shape of the lot, this and that. Say what the hardship is.
Okay.
And get that right into the decision.
We had a decision on, I think it was Lennox
Don't
Ave.
mention any addresses.
It was a rectangular lot that was flat and level. It was basically a rectangle. The reason that they needed a variance was the house was built too close to the street. It didn't have ledge cropping up, it didn't have an odd shape, it didn't have, you know, a mountain on it or anything like that. If a variance like that, someone ever appealed it and took it to a judge, the judge is gonna look at it and say, what the hell were these people thinking? You know, it's a square lot or a rectangular lot, it doesn't meet any of the criteria. Now, just saying the words doesn't make it true.
Right.
If you
We
say
wanna get better at
it's
our hardship.
built too close
We
to
agree
the
with that.
property line, then that's different.
You're defining it.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
have
let's
to be
define what the
specific.
reason is.
Okay. Well,
And if we
Makes sense.
can't find a reason, maybe we shouldn't give them a variance. But there's gotta be a reason. Okay?
You know,
Um,
probably 90% of the variances that get granted would never stand up if they were questioned.
Well,
90%.
I know that there's a narrative
Let's not
around
go.
town recently that we're ignoring bylaws, but.
No, and we're
the-
still on, we're still
I know,
being
but the fact is, a large percentage of when we grant variances, they're pre-existing.
yeah.
Like
correct.
a house being
But I've
built too
also
close to
gotten
the
away
street.
from that, and I've gone to the building inspector and the building commissioner and said, look it, stop with all these I'm not gonna have a variance granted for a 10,000 square foot lot with 20,000 feet required. If it's pre-existing,
Yeah.
don't bring it to me, don't come asking
Yeah.
for a variance for this.
But last month, everything we got was pre-existing.
Yeah, but I'm saying, especially on the lot, they've been asking us to issue variances that you don't need a variance on because it was done in 1990.
Yeah.
It conforms
They should,
to zoning. at that
building
time.
department should automatically okay it,
They're asking us to clean things up
not
that
send
are
it to
already
us.
clean.
Because it was pre-existing before the law
Do I
came
have
into
a
effect.
motion to adjourn
So moved.
and seconded?
Second.
And everybody's in favor of adjourning?
Aye.
And we're all done.